Welcome once again to our science lesson, and we have been looking at community and the environment, but we have factored mostly on the environment because where the environment, where the organisms are, the environment must be able to support them. We are able to classify environment into two, a biotic environment and biotic environment, or otherwise biotic factors. So biotic factors, we said, are living factors, living organisms, and how they interact, in the environment or ecosystem, and in the process they produce special relationships. So living organisms in the environment will interact, forming or producing special relationships. We were able to find out those kind of relationships like parasitism, like predation, and then now we came to competition. So we have looked at competition slightly. We found out that competition is when two or more organisms demand the same resource within the same environment. And because the resources are in limited supply, it leads to competition. So when you talk of competition, it's simply a struggle. Organisms start to struggle for survival or for existence, so that they can exist. Otherwise, if they do not struggle, those that have ability to struggle are the ones that will exist, and then they will survive. So competition simply means a struggle. You have heard of competition. Even at school level, we usually have teams competing. So that's a struggle. And in a struggle, we usually have a winner and a loser. So the same way in a competition, in a normal ecosystem, you're going to have organisms that will win. In other words, they will continue surviving, but others are going to lose. In other words, they will perish. So we have those that perish, we have those that survive. And then we found out that there are two types of competition. We have intraspecific competition. Intraspecific competition. Intra means within the same. Specific from the word species. So intra, within. Specific means it's coming from the word species. So when you talk of intraspecific competition, is competition between members of the same species. We gave an example. If you have few number of rats, like maybe 5, both male and female, or 6, and then you put them in a cage, and in that cage you supply all the requirements for rats. They will start increasing in number due to reproduction, and then in the process, the amount of requirements that were put in the cage will be limited. When the requirements in the cage become limited, there will be competition, but within members of the same species. So we shall have those ones that will perish, will die, but others will continue to survive, to carry on the lineage. But there is something important about intraspecific competition. We said intraspecific competition is not as severe. It's not severe in that it cannot lead to death of all the species. At least we are going to have 1 or 2 rats that will remain after some time. So if you are going to have 1 or 2, it means the number of rats or population will remain constant. That's why we usually have this type of a curve, a sigmoid curve of growth, where if that is the population and that is time, the number of organisms at first were fewer if they are of the same species, but after adapting to the ecosystem, after also being given enough requirements, they start increasing exponentially. But once it reaches the carrying capacity of the ecosystem, where we have enough resources, but they cannot support now increased population of that given species, we shall have a decrease at first, then the population remains constant. This is due to competition. So I'm saying, very important for us to note that intraspecific competition is not severe. It cannot lead to extinction. No extinction. It does not lead to extinction of the species because it is within the same species. And then we also looked at interspecific competition. Interspecific competition. So interspecific means we said intra is within, but inter will be among different species. Among different species. So we have maybe an organism of species A and organism of species B living within the same ecological niche, occupying the same ecological niche. We used Paramecium as our example. Paramecium cordatum, and Paramecium aurelia. Paramecium aurelia. So we said one characteristic of Paramecium aurelia is that it has high capacity to reproduce. Reproductive capacity is high. But for Paramecium cordatum, reproductive capacity is low. So this one having a high reproductive capacity as compared to cordatum, if they are going to be cultured in the same medium, aurelia will outcompete cordatum, and in the process, cordatum gets extinct. That is how we were able to find out or to get this curve. We were able to draw two curves which had population on that axis and time in days. It could be days or months. So we said the two will begin very well growing together like that, but now this one that will come down until it touches the x-axis. Now we have said that cordatum has low reproductive capacity. If that is A, curve B. But aurelia has high reproductive capacity. So from this A and B, we can be able to identify of the two, which one is representing cordatum and aurelia. So the one that has high reproductive capacity, as we were able to mention, will be represented by the curve A. So Paramecium aurelia, because of reproductive potential. But this one, for curve B, it means it increased for some time, but always below that one of aurelia because of disadvantage in reproductive ability. But now it disappears completely until it touches the x-axis. So this curve is going to represent cordatum. But now there was something that we pointed out, that if a curve is going to touch x-axis, it means the population has reached zero. Population of chordatum, from the curve, it means it has touched zero. It has reached zero. So at that point, we are able to say this species has been extinct. It undergoes extinction. So from this, we came up with a principle. That principle is called exclusive competition. So we can realize that interspecific competition is even more disadvantageous or dangerous to organisms because it leads to extinction of organism. Extinction means disappearing completely from the surface of the earth. So in interspecific competition, it's usually more severe. The effect is severe. It's more severe than that one of intraspecific competition. So we are noting that if you are going to have competition between organisms of different species, then the competition will be severe. Again, if these organisms are going to occupy the same ecological niche, if they occupy the same ecological niche, again, competition becomes severe, which can lead to extinction. So those two factors are important for us to remember, that if competition is between members of different species, it leads to severity of competition. If they occupy the same ecological niche, it leads to severity of competition. And you can remember the meaning of ecological niche. We said ecological niche is the role played by an organism in an ecosystem. In this case, the role means the type of or the kind of ecological or trophic level that organism occupies. It could be the role of being a producer, the role of a primary consumer, a secondary consumer, or tertiary consumer. So now this one leads us for us to understand. Sometimes it's not a must that we must have extinction, which means organisms of different species can compete, can have interspecific competition, but will continue to survive. For that balance to be created, then it requires adaptation. So adaptations to competition. So how do organisms adapt to competition? How will they become better strugglers in an ecosystem so that now they can exist to enhance their survival? So one of them, as we have already mentioned, the one that conferring advantages to Paramecium aurelia is having high birth rates. High birth rates. So organisms will have high birth rates to counter competition or competitors. This means even if some of the organisms will die as a result of struggling. Remember, in a struggle, even under normal circumstances, where they struggle, we have injuries coming about. So high birth rates is going to encounter such that even if we are going to have some few organisms that were struggling, dying, they will be replaced to replace those organisms that were struggling and died. And then another way of actually adapting to competition is through migration. Now, this is even common to human beings, where there is stiff competition, where we have resources being limited. human beings will move away from that ecosystem so that they can reduce competition. So migration is one way of avoiding competition. So organisms will migration from ecosystems with limited resources to avoid competition. So let us note that adaptation is not just from structural features only, but it can also be physiological, it can be behavioral. This is a behavior, moving away from ecosystems where there is stiff competition, so that now you can now start surviving in an ecosystem where there is plenty of resources. Another way is being active during different times of the day. So organisms may be active, being active during different times of the day. So that's why we have some organisms being octurnal or nocturnal, that is, and others being diurnal. So some will be active at night, while others will be active during the day. So how is it going to help? It's going to help in terms of resource partitioning. It partitions resources. Partitioning resources. Such that if resources could be, in this case, space, you realize that during night time, most of the organisms will be resting. Therefore, those that can be able to hunt during that time have enough time or have ample time to do that. Those that can do it during the day are able to do that during the day. So that is a way of partitioning resources. Then the other way, the last one, is demanding food resources differently, for having different food resources. Now, look at this case. If organisms are herbivores, consider herbivores in a natural ecosystem like a game park. That is where we have rich biodiversity. You realize that not all organisms, we have two types of herbivores. First of all, let us know that we have two types of herbivores. We have those ones that depends mainly on grass. We call them as grazers. And then we have those that can feed on grass, but majorly on leaves of bushes and small trees, and sometimes even canopies of tall trees. We call them browsers. So all of them are depending on the same food type, but now they partition their ecosystem. They are partitioning the ecosystem such that we have two layers. We have those that feed on the ground, and those ones that feed on arboreal structures. Arboreal structures like canopies of trees. Very good example is, we can use examples like, if we have here browsers, we include goats, and then grazers, purely sheep. We have cattle or a cow. They are majorly grazers. And then we have goats, we have camels as acting as browsers, and then we have rhinos being browsers. So it is in the same ecosystem. They are demanding the same food, in this case, green vegetable matter, but at the same time, there is less competition because of resource partitioning. This is again a form of resource partitioning. So that now there is less competition for green vegetation. If all these goats, the camels and rhinos, cattle and sheep, if they begin to feed on grass, the carrying capacity of that ecosystem may be exceeded faster than it would have been. So that's why we shall have some feeding on the ground, while the others feeding on the upper canopies of bushes, some shrubs, and even tall trees. So how does this one now affect the distribution? So it means competition will affect distribution of organisms, as we have already noted, migration. Migration is already a way of organisms moving or dispersing from their point of origin or where they were reproduced to other areas. So most of the organisms will be found where there is less competition. Less competition. Organisms will be found more where we have less competition, so that now they do not struggle, because struggling has a cost. As we have already said, during struggle, organisms may lose their life or may lose other resources like breeding sites and several others. So the question of distribution, how does competition now affect distribution, abundance, and locality of organism? Organism will be found more, any given organism, where we have less competition. Although with time, this is a dynamic phenomenon, so that with time again, that area or that ecosystem that was deemed to have less competition, with time again, things change, or resource distribution will change and competition will set in. So this is a dynamic phenomenon. It is never constant, so that we are going to have an ecosystem where it remains less competitive. With time, as population increases, competition will always set in. So for that reason, let us look at some few questions just to understand what we have gone through. So questions, one of them is this: when does competition occur? When does competition occur? So we have already said that for competition to take place, we are going to have organisms demanding for similar resources, but within the same ecosystem. So organisms demanding similar resources within the same ecosystem. Within the same ecosystem. So even wherever you are, if you look at your environment, there's either less competition or there's some competition or stiff competition. If it is a school situation where the enrollment of students is very high, you realize that even in a room, if we are going to have a room of 55 students and then more are added up to 70, there will be competition for several things like space. There will be competition for even oxygen. So the rallying call is that organisms are demanding similar resources, but within the same environment, same ecosystem. Then 2, what is the difference between interspecific and intraspecific competition? What is the difference between interspecific and intraspecific competition? So we can either use a table to get this very clear. Interspecific. I think it has been very clear, so it's not a big deal here. Intraspecific. We have said this competition between or within members of the same species. Competition between members of the same species. The same species. And interspecific competition between members of different species. Between members of different species. Members of different species. But there's something we noted as we were introducing this. We said intraspecific competition is less severe, but interspecific competition is more severe, in that intraspecific that cannot lead. There are no chances that it will lead to extinction of organisms that are competing, but interspecific is more severe, such that it may lead to extinction of the members. So here it's less severe, such that it does not interfere with the richness, species richness of the ecosystem. But for interspecific, it is more severe, as it may lead to extinction of one of the species that is competing. So the word is may. So I've said here, due to adaptation that we have looked at, it does not always mean that interspecific competition will lead to extinction. A very good example is between man and aquatic organisms. If man is going to invade aquatic systems for purpose of maybe drainage to create agricultural lands or for purpose of construction, then organisms that who are depending on that ecosystem definitely are going to die and in the process get extinct. Question 3. Question 3. Resources are requirements in the environment. Resources are requirements in the environment for use by organisms. For use by organisms. List the resources needed by plants and animals. List resources needed by plants and animals. So we can do a table here just to enumerate the lists: plants and then animals. So from your own experience, you can tell me some of, or you can be able to think through some of the requirements of plants. if it's not available, they may die. So one thing that I know that is coming through your mind is sunlight. We know that sunlight is important for purpose of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis again cannot just take place when sunlight alone is provided. It takes together with water. Water is important for plants. Again, that one is not enough. We need a gas. That gas is called carbon dioxide gas. Besides that, you also require mineral ions. Mineral ions. Plants require mineral ions. Plants require enough space. If you overcrowd plants, if you plant them in a crowded area, there will be competition for all this, and in the process, some of the plants may not be able to survive to maturity. They may die. And then also it requires suitable soil conditions. Soil conditions. When you talk of soil conditions here, it could be aerated soil, a well aerated, so that there is enough supply of gases, both carbon dioxide and oxygen. It could be in terms of pH, correct pH. It could be in terms of not being waterlogged. For animals, one important requirement is food. You cannot survive without food for a longer time. So you need food, you need water, very important, to act as a medium for biochemical reaction, cooling your body, even bathing and several other things if you're a human being. And then we have others like mates. Mates are important. We know that mate is the opposite sex of an organism. If it is a man, for instance, we require male and female, which is important for reproduction. Because we cannot have one single sex in man reproducing. We cannot have men alone reproducing or female alone reproducing. It requires another mate, another partner of opposite sex. So there are several, even oxygen important as a gas for respiration, shelter. Organisms require shelter, and also they require breeding sites. Breeding sites, or a site for reproduction. If they are birds, we can say nesting sites. Nesting sites. The other question. Question 4. The question is this: Australian magpies, that is magpies, is found across Australia. Is found across Australia. Many people walk. Many people walking through. Many people walking through magpie nesting area. nesting area have stories of attacks. Monkey bee is a kind of a bird. It's a bird. So the question is, explain this behavior. Explain this behavior of the magpies. Now, one important characteristic of these birds, the magpies, is that their nesting place or area is on the ground. Unlike other birds that is on trees, most of them are on trees. So this being the nesting area, and human beings are maybe walking through these areas, they will consider human beings as a threat to the species. So one very important idea is man is a threat. Is a threat to magpies. So why do they attack them then? It's a threat to magpies because man will compete, or if he's going through that area, it could be for several other purposes like recreation, sometimes even clearing the ecosystem for purpose of maybe agricultural purposes or even recreation purposes. So he becomes a threat, he becomes a competitor. Man is a threat to magpies, therefore competes with magpies for space. So why the attack? The attack of magpies is a way of protecting their territory. Attacks is a way of territory protection. Territory protection. Why should they protect their territory? So that their nesting or breeding areas are not destroyed. And even the young ones are not also going to be killed or destroyed by the human activities. So attacks is a way of territory protection. 2, protect young ones and breeding sites. So this phenomenon where organisms are able to fend off other organisms from their ecosystem for purpose of protecting the young ones, for purpose of maybe protecting their ecosystem, is called territoriality. Territoriality. So just from the word territory, territoriality. So they are protecting their territory from destruction together with the young ones. Then 5, the other question. The graph below shows the graph shows results of experiments. The results of experiments where equal number of 2 similar species, where equal number of 2 similar species, species A and B, with similar requirements were placed in similar environments. With similar requirements were placed in same environment. So having that statement, we can get now the graph. So the graph is here. So on y-axis, population, on x-axis, time, which will vary according to the type of species. So you just put there time, and then a graph is showing that one of the species A, there is slow growth, exponential growth, slightly slow growth, and then gradual decrease in population. And then there is another one here where population increases, but not as fast as that one of A, but now again it drops. It drops until, not completely, it's able to adapt. So it's not wiped completely from the ecosystem. So that one becomes B. So the question is, part A, what is the aim of the experiment? What was the aim of the experiment? So you can squeeze that one there, aim. What was the aim of the experiment? The aim of the experiment. So we have already gone through a similar kind of curves or graphs. So the aim of the experiment was to investigate the effect of competition for similar resources within the same ecosystem. To investigate effect of competition for similar resources within the same ecosystem. So if we have species A and B that are demanding for same resources, at first the resources are enough. That's why we have this kind of growth. Up to that point, it can be assumed that at first the resources are enough, but as the population increases, population of both A and B increases, the demand becomes very high. When demand increases, then competition sets in. When competition sets in due to limited resources, the one organism or species that is well adapted, that has successful adaptive characteristic, is the one that will continue to increase in number. But the one that has poor chemistry, disadvantageous characteristics, it will now start decreasing in population. And for this case, it is B. So B is less effective in competition. A is more effective in competition. Maybe because it possesses more of the adaptive features, some of which we just mentioned before we came to the questions. Then the other question is, part B, explain the results. Explain the results. Why is it that one is continually increasing? Or we can just look at both graphs simultaneously. We can start from here. The two graphs are increasing. The population of the two organisms are increasing. But again, the increase is not the same. B is increasing slightly at a lower rate and A at a faster rate. But it reaches a time when now the population growth of both A and B decreases, but now that of B decreases even more, further than that one of A, showing that A is more successful in competition. That's why it has a high population throughout, and even if there was a decrease, it does not drop but for B, it is less successful in competition. So we may note this. So part B, explain the results. So you just note simply that A is more successful in competition. A is more successful in competition. The reason being, its population, that's why its population does not fall or does not decrease drastically. And then for B is just a contrast, is less successful in competition. And for that reason, we can see from the graph how it drops very fast. Thus, its population drops or falls drastically. It falls drastically. Then the other question, question 6. Question 6, it has been observed that in the same pack of lions, some show submissive behavior, while the others show dominant behavior. So the question is, explain this phenomenon. Explain the phenomenon. So in other words, if we just simplify the statement, why is it that in a pack of lions is just a collection of lions that are occupying a given territory or a given ecosystem? So we call that one as a pack. So when you talk of a pack, it's simply a collection of the lions, just like a school of fish. So we call it a pack of lions, a pack of foxes. So some will show submissive behavior within the same pack, while others will show dominant behavior. Now, for us to get the answer here, we have to find out what is the normal behavior of lions. How do they survive? They survive by hunting, but they do not do it singly. Lions usually hunt in a pack, and those that do it alone or singly, they may succeed, others do not succeed. But for them to succeed, they are going to do it as a team, as a pack. So that is why they should be in a pack. That's why they should be in a team. So just like in any other team, we are going to have some members of the team that will be dominant, that will show leadership, while the others will be subjects that will show submissiveness. This is important because if all of them or every member in a group decides to be dominant, there arises fights. And when fights arises in a pack of lions, there will be a problem when it comes to hunting, which is a very important characteristic for them to survive in the jungle. So we are saying to survive as a pack is because they have to hunt together for purpose of hunting. So in this hunting, some will provide leadership. So leaders are required. So them that becomes leaders are the one that becomes dominant. Therefore, become dominant. And them that are led, others are led. They become submissive. So what is the effect if we don't have a balance of submission and dominance? Otherwise, we are saying if this one does not happen, there will be fights within that pack. And this one reduces their effectiveness for hunting. If this does not occur, it arises to fights within the pack. And clearly we have said, if we are going to have fights in the pack, effectiveness to hunting is going to reduce. This may reduce their effectiveness in hunting. Even from social platforms, we still require this kind of synergy or this kind of relationship where others are dominant and others are submissive, so that a team can be able to move. If you are a fan of soccer, you know that in every team we have a captain, the most dominant, who can control the pack, who can control the rest of the team, so that they become effective in scoring goals. Otherwise, if that one does not happen, they are not going to survive the life of jungle that requires, or wilderness that requires groups for them to hunt. This one does not just happen in lions alone. We also have other animals like foxes. The foxes, wild dogs, they also behave in a similar manner. Wild dogs. So this is a very common phenomenon, especially for carnivores. Then the last question here. Question 7. State importance of competition. State the significance. Significance of competition in an ecosystem. So what kind of advantages comes with competition in an ecosystem? Now, we have already said that one way of adapting to competition is through migration. If organisms were maybe born at a given area, central point, there'll be competition because they'll start increasing in population. That's the point. Population increases. The resources at first were enough to support the population or to support the species. But now, because of increase in population, the resources become scarce. Carrying capacity of that particular ecosystem falls below the threshold. When it falls below the threshold, organisms will migrate. Some will go east, west, like that, in all directions. We call that one dispersion. So organisms will disperse due to competition. Dispersion is good because it allows these organisms that were born at A now and they are concentrated in that ecosystem to move to a different ecosystem B, where they will now start surviving, start getting used to it, adapting, and then in the process reproduce and form another population there. So that process is called colonization. So it's going to allow dispersion of organisms from their original point, central point, until they colonize other areas that are not occupied, which is important, so that now organism can continually survive without competing to severity or competing to extinction. So that is the one importance of that. So in other words, if you are noting, we have said competition leads to dispersion of organisms, which allows them to colonize other areas, just to reduce competition. So that's one significance. The other significance is this. So the first one allows dispersion of organisms, thus able to colonize other areas that are not occupied by organisms. Now again, we have also said that specifically for intraspecific competition, we realize that it does not lead to extinction, yes, but still there is competition leading to perishing of those organisms that do not have good survival tactics or successful ways of survival. So in the process, if we had some weaklings in that community or in that species, they will be wiped out. So the one that will remain are the ones that are strong. That's why we have this phenomenon called survival for the fittest. The most fit will survive. The less fit are going to perish. So in the process, we shall find a population, a gene pool that is highly successful to compete or to be able to survive in that ecosystem. In other words, it is improving quality of the species, leads to improvement in the quality of the species, such that the weaklings have been wiped and now the most strong are the ones that have remained. So I think it is very clear, and now we have been able to understand the topic very well, that competition can be both in a natural ecosystem and even from social point of views. From what we have just learned, that competition being an interactive relationship, it is a very important relationship from what we have just wound up with or summarized with, that is going to enable organism occupy other areas and also is going to improve the quality of the species. I hope you have enjoyed the subtopic. We have more. In our next lesson, we are going to look at pollination as an interactive relationship. Thank you.